over there?
We are out
Right
here
over there.
at
That red brick house.
Appomattox
That
Courthouse
is the Clover Hill
where
Tavern.
the signing
That's
of the
where,
Civil War
the parole passes were printed
end of
for the
war.
Oh, I
Confederate
saw that, yeah.
soldiers.
between General Lee
The movie was
and
great.
General Grant
Yes,
took
great.
place.
It is a good movie. Yeah, definitely.
Right over there at the McLean House. And we are having this historian tell us about it.
What time is it?
Hi folks, how you doing?
Good. 2:52.
Alright folks, so we can go ahead and get started. I'm Drew, I'm a summer intern here, and today I'm going to be talking for about a half hour about the battles that happened here on April 8th of 1865 and April 9th of 1865, and why those battles are important to what eventually happens in the McLean House, which is that red brick house, where the surrender proceedings actually occurred. Now, a lot of people don't know there were battles here at all. They assume, well, the surrender may have just happened in the courthouse or the McLean House, and that Lee and Grant just decided, hey, you know what, we're done. We're just going to end it right here. But that's not the case. There's a whole military campaign that goes on that leads up to the surrender that happens here. And the battles that eventually happen from this campaign are going to be extremely important to what happens over there. So I'm going to pose a very open-ended question, because I don't know everyone's knowledge of the Civil War or Civil War battles, but whatever you think, you can just shout it out because it's going to help this talk. So the battle I'm going to pose to you folks is what makes a Civil War battle important? What makes a battle important in the Civil War?
Who's in control of
Who's in charge?
Who's in charge?
Definitely. That's a big part of the Civil War. Leadership. Or that leadership. What's that?
The location.
Location, very important. Leadership, location.
The purpose.
Purpose of battle, right. If I'm a general and I'm commanding 70,000 plus men, you know, I need to know what I'm going to do with that men and how I'm going to fight my enemy. And what can that be called?
Strategy.
Strategy, exactly. That's one of the #1 things on your mind if you're a Civil War general. Now, what's another word we can use for, say, moving an army? If you're going to put your army on the march and get them where they need to go, what could that be called?
Mobilization.
Mobilization, absolutely. Or maneuverability, right? Mobilization, maneuverability, same types of things. All these are very important to Civil War battles. And some of these themes that we just talked about are going to be very important to what happens here. But before I can talk about what happens on the 8th and 9th of April of 1865, I have to go back a bit to talk about how we get here. Now I'm going to show you a map, and this map may look extremely confusing, because again, I don't know everyone's knowledge on how to read these maps or the Civil War, but I'm going to kind of point things out that are important on it. So this is the Appomattox campaign. Now, this campaign starts March 29th of 1865, and it goes to April 9th of 1865. Now, in the red here is the Confederate Army. This is the Confederate Army's movements. And then in the blue is the Union Army's movements. And this direction is south, and that's going to be important to this talk. Now, going back into 1864, you're going to have fighting through Virginia, and this is going to be called the Overland Campaign. This is when General-in-Chief of all Union forces, Ulysses S. Grant, is going to attempt to take Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of the Confederacy, as well as finally crushing General Robert E. Lee's army of Northern Virginia. Now, General Lee at this point is the General-in-Chief of all Confederate armies. Now, as this fighting is going on, they get closer and closer to Petersburg, Virginia, which is about 2 hours away from here. Now, Petersburg is the key to Richmond. If you take Richmond, you have to take Petersburg, because Petersburg is sending supplies to Richmond through all the railroad systems that run through Petersburg. So if you take Petersburg, you take Richmond. Now, Grant knows he cannot just have one large battle and be able to get to Petersburg and Richmond. So what he does is he entrenches, similar to World War I combat, what that would have looked like, with trenches on both sides. Grant entrenches, and then that makes Lee entrench. And what you get from this is you have a 9.5-month-long siege of Grant trying to take the city of Petersburg, Virginia. On April 2nd, Grant is finally going to be able to break Lee's defenses around Petersburg. And what this causes is chaos in the Confederate Army. Because now you have around 60,000 Confederate troops who are fleeing west. And who they're running from are 3 Union armies that are now joining together to pursue Robert E. Lee. Now these 3 Union armies are the Army of the Potomac, which is commanded by George Meade. This is probably the most influential and famous army because they fought at the Battle of Gettysburg, and they've also been fighting Lee's army in Northern Virginia for most of the war. Then you have the Army of the James, which is commanded by General Edward Ord. Then you have the Army of the Shenandoah, which is commanded by General Philip Sheridan. Sheridan is commanding the cavalry army, so this is the cavalry force of the Union Army at this point. Now these three Union armies are going to come up with a strategy right from the top with General Grant and President of the United States Abraham Lincoln. And they're going to decide that now is the time to relentlessly pursue Lee. They know the Confederate army is not doing good. The Confederate spirit and the Confederate mind is really not into this war anymore. Thousands have deserted to go home by this point, and many are without the basic needs that a soldier needs to have, like food and water. So the Confederate army is not looking good, and these three Union armies see that. And they know if they can pursue Lee and force a surrender, then the Civil War could be over. And that's going to be the plan from now on. So as Lee leaves Petersburg, Virginia, he's going to look for a place to consolidate his troops at. He needs to bring his troops together before he can put in a strategy of what to do next. And where he's going to send his troops is to Amelia Courthouse. Now, he sends his troops to Amelia Courthouse, and while he's there, he needs to start looking for food. Because the one main problem the Army of the Northern Virginia is having is they don't have a lot of food. And if you can't feed your men, and your men are starving, you can't feed your horses. And unfortunately, many of the horses are starving to death because they don't have any food for them. Because of this, that makes the army move even slower. So they're at Amelia Courthouse, and Lee's going to make the decision, which is going to become crucial to this campaign. And that decision he makes is he's going to stay a whole day at Amelia Courthouse so his army can go out into the fields and farms and find food. Once they do that, what they find is very little food. Because by this point, the civilians have been stripped clean by both armies at this point in the war. So there's nothing for them to have. Now, what do you think the major problem with Lee waiting a whole day at Amelia Courthouse could be?
It allowed the Union Army to come forward.
Exactly. He just gave these three Union armies a whole day to catch up to them. They were already extremely close to them. Now they're right on their tail. And because of this, this is going to now be in about an 100-mile running battle west from this point on, where the Union Army is close enough to be harassing the Confederate Army everywhere they go. And from this, they're going to be dwindling the ranks of the Confederate Army, capturing prisoners, wounding prisoners, capturing soldiers, wounding soldiers, and taking prisoners as they go. Now, as I said, Lee waits a whole day at Amelia Courthouse, but he does come up with what he wants his strategy to be. And his strategy is going to be to turn south, because by turning south, he can link up with General Joe Johnston's Confederate Army, who is in North Carolina. Now, Joe Johnston's army is occupied in North Carolina by Union General William Tecumseh Sherman's army. And Sherman is waiting down there for orders. And Lee's plan is if he can get south into North Carolina, he can link up with Johnston's army, fight Sherman, defeat him, and then turn around and fight Grant and defeat him. Now this plan is incredibly ambitious in itself. It would need a literal miracle to work. But I like to point that out because it just shows how desperate the Confederate Army is at this point. That this is their best option. They don't have a better option than this plan. And that's the plan. And they're going to follow a railroad that goes south into North Carolina so that they can get food along the way. The Union gets word of this. So they go to a place called Jetersville, Virginia. And at Jetersville, they get south of the Confederate Army. And as the Confederate Army is moving south, what they find in front of them is not Confederate soldiers covering their retreat. It's Union artillery and cavalry that is dug in. And because of that, the Confederate Army is now blocked. They can't get south now because they're blocked. And even though it's only artillery and cavalry, what is coming up behind that artillery and cavalry is more Union troops, infantry. And this means the Confederate Army is going to be in no place to fight Union infantry, to fight a big battle here. So they have to continue going west. And if they're going to continue going west, they need to be getting supplied along the way, right? They need food if they're going to continue going west. The plan is to go west and to eventually turn south to link up with Johnston. That's still the plan. And the food that they're going to be getting supplied is coming from Lynchburg, Virginia, on the South Side Railroad, which runs west through Virginia. So everywhere they go now, they're going to be going to towns where the railroad is going to be, so they can be getting this food. Lee is just trying to survive at this point.